Drink, Vincent, to the future. The gloved hand had already done its work. Minutes earlier, in an empty room, that same hand tipped a single drop of clear poison along the rim of a crystal glass, turned the stem so the light caught it just right, and set it down smiling. No fear, no hurry. The calm of someone who had killed before and would sleep just fine tonight. Now the trap sat inches from the most feared man in Chicago, and all he had to do was lift it. In one sip, the Mafia boss would toast his own success and die at his own table. But the waitress by the wall had already seen the glass. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something simple. If this story pulls you in, subscribe to the channel and stay with me all the way to the end, because what happens to this quiet waitress will surprise you more than once. And do me a favor, drop the name of the city you're watching from in the comments right now so I can see just how far this story has traveled tonight. Now let's begin. Claire Morgan had learned a long time ago that the safest place in any room was the place nobody looked at. And nobody looked at the waitress. At 28 years old, she moved through the Belmont house like a shadow with a tray. She refilled water before anyone asked. She remembered that the silver-haired gentleman at table 9 hated ice, that the woman in the emerald dress wanted her steak so rare it nearly walked, that the couple by the window came every third Friday and always argued about money before dessert. Claire knew all of it, and she said almost nothing. That was the point. The Belmont house was the kind of place where a single dinner cost more than most people earned in a week. Marble floors, chandeliers that looked like frozen rain, waiters in black vests who moved like they were performing surgery. And on this particular night, the entire back room had been closed off, reserved, and swept twice by men in dark suits who did not eat, did not drink, and did not smile. Claire had seen men like that before, in another life. "You're on the private room tonight," her manager Denise told her, tapping a clipboard against her palm. "Mr. Callahan's party, 8 guests. You do not speak unless spoken to. You do not linger. You pour, you serve, you disappear. Understand?" "Understood," Claire said. Denise looked at her a beat too long. "You're the only one I trust with this table, Claire. These are not people who forgive mistakes." "I don't make mistakes," Claire said quietly, and she wasn't bragging. She was warning. Denise didn't catch it. Most people didn't. Claire pushed through the doors into the private room, and the temperature of the whole evening changed. The laughter here was lower, richer, more careful. 8 people sat around a long table dressed in white linen, and every one of them wore the kind of confidence that only comes from having money, or having power, or having done things they'd never confess. And at the head of the table sat the man himself, Vincent Callahan. She'd read about him, the way everyone had. The magazines called him a self-made investor, a genius who turned struggling companies into gold. They ran flattering photos of him at charity galas, shaking hands with senators, cutting ribbons. But the way the staff whispered his name in the kitchen told a different story. The way the security men stood by the doors told a different story. The way even the wealthiest guests in that room seemed to shrink slightly whenever he spoke told the truest story of all. Vincent Callahan was not an investor. He was a king. And kings, Claire knew, always had someone waiting to take the crown. He was maybe 55, silver at the temples, with dark eyes that never stopped moving even when his face was perfectly still. He wore his suit, like armor. When he laughed, the whole table laughed a half-second later, like they were waiting for permission. When he leaned back, they leaned in. Claire took all of this in without seeming to look at any of it. She'd been trained to read a room the way other people read a menu. "More wine for the table," Vincent said, not to anyone in particular, and Claire moved. She poured with a steady hand, working her way around the table, listening without listening. The conversation was about a deal, some acquisition, some property on the north side of the city. But underneath the words, Claire heard the other thing. The thing nobody said out loud. Tension. The kind that hums under a table like a live wire. "To the future," Vincent said, lifting his glass, "and to the men smart enough to be part of it." The table murmured their toast, and that was when Claire saw it. The wine glass in front of Vincent Callahan was wrong. Not dramatically, Not obviously. To anyone else in that room, it would have looked identical to the other 7. Same crystal, same size, same golden shimmer of wine catching the chandelier light. But it was turned. Every other glass on that table sat with its stem straight, its base squared to the plate the way the staff had been trained to set them. Claire had set half of them herself. But Vincent's glass had been rotated, maybe 15 degrees, and pushed forward just slightly so it sat closer to his hand than any other glass sat to its owner. Someone had touched it. Someone had touched it after the table was set and moved it into the exact position where a distracted man would reach for it without looking. Claire's stomach dropped. She had spent years learning to notice the small wrong thing in a room full of right things. A door left unlocked, a car parked too long, a stranger who smiled with his mouth but not his eyes. The instinct never left. You could quit the job, but you couldn't quit the eyes. And her eyes were screaming at her now. That glass had been prepared. She didn't know how. Poison most likely painted on the rim or dissolved in the wine itself. She didn't know who. But she knew with the cold certainty that had kept her alive in her old life that if Vincent Callahan lifted that glass and drank, he would not leave this restaurant breathing. And here was the part that made Claire's heart pound against her ribs. She had a choice. She could do nothing. She could pour the wine, step back, disappear into the wall the way she always did, and let whatever was going to happen, happen. Vincent Callahan was not a good man. She knew that. The world would not weep for a Mafia boss. And more than that, if she interfered, if she stepped back into the shadows she'd fought so hard to escape, she risked losing everything. The quiet life, the small apartment, the blessed, boring anonymity she'd built like a fortress around her heart. All she had to do was nothing. For a long, terrible second, Claire Morgan stood frozen with a bottle of $2,000 wine in her hand, and she thought about all the reasons to walk away. And then she thought about the mission that went wrong, the one that ended her old life, the faces of the people who didn't make it out because someone in a room just like this one decided that some deaths were acceptable. She had promised herself on the worst night of her life that she would never again stand still while someone died in front of her. Never again. Claire made her decision in the space of a heartbeat. She stepped forward smoothly, refilling the glass of the man to Vincent's right, and as she did, she let her wrist tilt just slightly, tipping the bottle a fraction too far. A thin ribbon of red wine spilled across the white linen, spreading fast. "Oh, I'm so sorry, sir," she said, her voice all apology and grace, and she reached across the table with a napkin. And in that single fluid motion, under the cover of the spill, she took Vincent Callahan's poisoned glass and replaced it with the untouched glass of the man beside him. It happened in less than 2 seconds. A magician's move, a pickpocket's grace, the kind of thing you can only do if you've practiced it 1,000 times in another life. "Clumsy of me," Claire murmured, dabbing at the spilled wine. "Let me get you a fresh setting." She lifted the poisoned glass onto her tray, along with the spilled napkin, and stepped back toward the wall. Done. Invisible. Her heart was hammering so loud she was certain the whole table could hear it, but her hands were perfectly steady. Nobody had noticed. Nobody ever noticed. That was her gift and her curse. She had just saved a man's life, and not a single soul in that room knew it had even been in danger. Except that when Claire looked up, Vincent Callahan was looking directly at her. Not at the spill, not at the flustered guest, at her. His dark eyes were fixed on her face with an intensity that made her blood run cold, and there was something in them she recognized instantly because she'd worn that same look herself 100 times. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't annoyance at a clumsy waitress. It was calculation. He had seen something, maybe not everything, but something. And now he was studying her the way a wolf studies a rabbit that just did something a rabbit should not know how to do. Claire held his gaze for exactly the right amount of time, no more, no less. A waitress who'd made an embarrassing mistake would look apologetic, then look away. So that was what she did. She dropped her eyes, murmured another apology to the table, and retreated toward the kitchen with the poisoned glass balanced on her tray like it was made of nothing. But she could feel his eyes on her back the entire way. In the kitchen, Claire set the tray down and gripped the edge of the steel counter, and for just one moment she let herself breathe. Her hands, so steady in the dining room, began to tremble. "You okay?" a young busboy named Marcus asked, passing behind her. "You look like you saw a ghost." "I spilled wine on a rich man," Claire said, forcing a small smile. "I'll survive." Marcus laughed and moved on. But Claire didn't move. She stared down at the glass, the poisoned glass, and she knew she had a problem. She couldn't just wash it. If she was right about what was on it, then that glass was evidence, proof that someone in that room had tried to commit murder, and whoever had done it was still out there, sitting at that table, or standing by that door, waiting to find out why the Mafia boss hadn't dropped dead yet. She poured the wine down the drain but kept the glass, wrapping it carefully in a clean towel and tucking it beneath the counter. Her mind was already running the calculations she'd sworn she'd never run again. Who had access to the table after it was set? The staff, obviously. But the setting had been checked by Vincent's own men, so either it was one of the 8 guests or it was someone on the inside. Someone Vincent trusted enough to let close to his glass. That thought made her go still. Because if the killer was someone Vincent trusted, then this wasn't just an assassination. It was a betrayal. Claire shook her head hard, as if she could physically knock the old instincts loose. "Not your problem," she told herself. "You saved a life. That's where it ends. You're a waitress. Go pour water for table 9. Go home to your quiet apartment. Forget this room ever existed." But she already knew it wasn't going to be that easy. Because a man like Vincent Callahan, a man who had survived decades in a world where survival was the only prize, did not let a mystery walk out the back door. The rest of the dinner passed without incident. Claire served the other tables. She kept her head down. She did not go near the private room again, sending Marcus in with the coffee and the check instead. And slowly, one by one, the wealthy guests filed out into the Chicago night, laughing, shaking hands, none of them aware that the evening had nearly ended in a corpse. Vincent Callahan was the last to leave. He walked out slow, flanked by 2 of his men, and as he passed the entrance to the main dining room, he paused, just for a moment, and his eyes swept the floor until they found Claire, clearing a table by the window. He didn't speak. He didn't nod. He simply looked at her, long enough to make it clear it was not an accident, and then he was gone, swallowed by the revolving door and the black car waiting at the curb. Claire let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She told herself it was over. She was wrong. By the time Claire finished her shift, it was past midnight. She hung up her apron, said goodnight to Denise, and stepped out the back door into the cold. The alley behind the Belmont house smelled like rain and garbage and city. She pulled her coat tight and started toward the bus stop, her breath fogging in front of her. She made it 4 blocks before she felt it. The thing every person from her old life learned to feel in their spine before they ever learned it with their eyes. She was being followed. Claire didn't stop. She didn't turn. She kept her pace exactly the same, but every sense in her body sharpened to a razor's edge. She listened. Footsteps, maybe half a block back, matching her rhythm. A car, moving too slow along the curb, its engine a low purr. She counted her options. The bus stop was too exposed. The alley to her left was a dead end, but there was a 24-hour diner 2 streets over, lit up bright, full of witnesses. She turned toward the diner. The car turned with her. It pulled ahead, smooth and unhurried, and stopped at the curb directly in her path. A back window rolled down, and Vincent Callahan looked out at her. "Miss Morgan," he said. Claire stopped walking. Her whole body went still and ready, the way it used to before everything went wrong. She said nothing. "Get in the car," Vincent said. It was not a threat. It was not even quite an order. It was almost strangely an invitation. "I'd rather walk," Claire said. Something that might have been a smile crossed Vincent's face. "I imagine you would, but we both know you're not going to sleep tonight until you understand what happened at that table, and neither am I." He paused. "I'm not going to hurt you, Miss Morgan. If I wanted you hurt, you'd already know it. I only want to talk. Claire studied him. She weighed the odds. She could run, but she couldn't outrun a car. She could scream, but this was his city, and she doubted anyone would answer. And underneath the fear, there was the other thing she couldn't quite admit to herself. He was right. She wasn't going to sleep. Claire opened the car door and got in. The inside of the car was warm and quiet and smelled of leather and cigars. Vincent sat across from her, one leg crossed over the other, his hands folded calmly in his lap. Up close, he looked older than the magazine photos, and more tired. The man beside the driver never turned around, but Claire clocked the shape of the gun under his jacket the instant she sat down. "You know my name," Claire said. "You had me followed." "I had you researched," Vincent corrected. "There's a difference. It took my people 3 hours to find your address, your employment history, your references." He tilted his head. "It took them all 3 hours to find nothing before that. No college, no family, no past. A woman named Claire Morgan appears in the world 4 years ago, fully formed, and takes a job pouring wine." He let the silence stretch. "People with no past usually have the most interesting ones." Claire kept her face still. "I like my privacy." "Most people who like their privacy," Vincent said, "haven't spent years learning how to disappear." He leaned forward slightly. "You switched my glass tonight." It was not a question. Claire didn't answer. "I've reached across 10,000 dinner tables in my life, Miss Morgan," Vincent went on, his voice low and even. "I have never once thought about the position of my wine glass. Neither, I promise you, did anyone else in that room. But you did. You saw a glass turned 15 degrees the wrong way, and you understood exactly what it meant." He studied her face. "Do you know how many people on this earth could have done what you did tonight? I could count them on my hands. And every one of them works for a government, or used to." Claire's pulse was steady, but only through effort. "You're giving me a lot of credit for a clumsy spill." "After you left," Vincent said, ignoring her, "my people examined the glass in front of the guest you gave mine to, the one that had been mine." He paused, and for the first time something cold and hard entered his voice. "There was a residue on the rim, a nerve agent, tasteless, fast. 2 sips, and my heart would have stopped before dessert. The doctors would have called it cardiac arrest. A powerful man, working too hard, gone too soon." His eyes bored into hers. "I would be dead right now, Miss Morgan. I would be lying on that floor with a napkin over my face. Except a waitress that no one was supposed to notice noticed." The car was silent, except for the hum of the road. "So I'll ask you the only question that matters," Vincent said. "The question I came out here at midnight to ask." He leaned in, and his voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Why did you save me?" And there it was. The question Claire had been dreading since the moment she made the switch. Because the honest answer was complicated. She hadn't saved him because he was innocent. He wasn't. She hadn't saved him because she wanted something, or because she was on anyone's side. She had saved him for one reason and one reason only, and it was a reason she had never spoken out loud to another living soul. "Does it matter?" Claire said finally. "It matters more than anything," Vincent said, "because everyone who has ever done anything for me has wanted something in return. Money, protection, power, a favor to be called in later. Everyone." He searched her face. "But you gave me my life back, and then you tried to walk to a bus stop and disappear. You didn't want anything. And a man in my position, Miss Morgan, does not know what to do with a person who doesn't want anything. It frightens me more than my enemies do." Claire looked at him for a long moment, and then she told him the truth, a small piece of it. "A long time ago," she said quietly, "I stood in a room and I watched people die. People who didn't have to, because someone with power decided their lives were worth less than an outcome. And I did nothing, because doing something would have cost me." She swallowed. "I promised myself I would never stand still again. That's all. It wasn't about you. If it had been anyone at that table, I'd have done the same thing." She met his eyes. "You're not special, Mr. Callahan. You were just closest to the poison." For a long moment, Vincent said nothing. And then he did something Claire did not expect. He laughed, softly, almost sadly. "You know," he said, "in 30 years, you may be the first person who has ever sat in this car and told me the truth to my face." He shook his head slowly. "You're not special," he says. "Do you have any idea how many people have died for pretending I was?" He tapped the window and the car began to slow. "I'm going to let you go home tonight, Miss Morgan," Vincent said. "You saved my life, and I pay my debts, but I need you to understand something before you step out of this car." His face hardened. "The person who tried to kill me tonight is going to learn very soon that they failed, and when they investigate why, they are going to find exactly what I found. A glass moved, a waitress who noticed, and they are going to reach the same conclusion I did." He held her gaze. "You didn't just save my life tonight. You made yourself the one loose thread in a plan that was supposed to be perfect, and people who plan perfect murders do not like loose threads." Claire felt the cold settle into her chest. "I was invisible for 4 years," she said. "You were," Vincent agreed, "until tonight. Tonight, you became the most important person neither of us can afford to lose." The car stopped. They were in front of her apartment building. He'd known where it was the whole time. "I'm not asking you for anything. I told you. I pay my debts, and I don't put a person in danger and then walk away from them. So here's what I'm offering. Not money, not a job." He held out a small card, blank except for a single phone number. "Protection, and the truth. Because I don't know yet who tried to kill me tonight, but I know it was someone close, someone I trust, and you, Miss Morgan, may be the only person in this city who can see what my own people can't." Claire looked at the card. She didn't take it. "I left that life," she said. "I'm not going back." "I understand," Vincent said, and he set the card down on the seat between them. "But you already went back tonight. The moment you saw that glass, you were back. The only question now is whether you face what's coming with someone watching your door or alone." He nodded toward the building. "Go inside. Lock your locks. And when you can't sleep tonight, when you're lying awake going over every face at that table, wondering which one of them wants you dead, you'll know where the number is." Claire got out of the car without a word. She stood on the sidewalk and watched the black car pull away and vanish into the Chicago dark, and she told herself one more time that it was over, that she'd done her good deed, and now she could go back to being no one. But her feet didn't move. Because Vincent Callahan was right about one thing, and they both knew it. She was already going back over the faces. She climbed the stairs to her apartment, turned all 3 of her locks, and sat down on the edge of her bed in the dark. On the nightstand, she'd set the towel-wrapped glass she'd smuggled out of the restaurant. The evidence. The one physical proof that a murder had almost happened tonight. She should throw it away. She should throw it away, throw the card away, quit her job, leave the city, and start over as someone new for the 5th time in her life. That would be the smart thing. Instead, Claire sat in the dark and let her mind do the thing it had been trained to do, the thing she'd spent 4 years trying to forget how to do. She lined up the 8 guests at that table. She lined up the men by the door. She lined up the staff. And she began, one by one, to ask the question that would change everything. Who had been close enough to touch that glass? Who had a reason to want the king dead? And who, in a room full of people who feared Vincent Callahan, had been calm enough, patient enough, and cold enough to paint poison on crystal and set it back down with a steady hand? Somewhere out there, the person who had tried to kill Vincent Callahan was already asking their own questions, and the answer to both of them was the same. A quiet waitress named Claire Morgan. She didn't sleep that night, not for a single minute. She sat with her back to the wall and her eyes on the door, the way she used to, and somewhere around 4 in the morning, she reached over to the nightstand and picked up the blank card with the single phone number on it. She didn't call it, but she didn't throw it away either. And in the silence of that small apartment, Claire Morgan finally admitted to herself the truth she'd been running from since the moment she switched that glass. The quiet life she'd built was already gone. It had ended the second she chose to save a man she had every reason to let die. There was no going back to invisible now. There was only forward, into a war she didn't start, between people she didn't know, over an empire she wanted no part of. And the most dangerous man in Chicago had just decided that the only person he could trust was the one woman in the city who had spent 4 years praying no one would ever look at her twice. Claire closed her hand around the card. Outside, the rain began to fall on the sleeping city, and somewhere across town, in a room she couldn't see, the person who wanted Vincent Callahan dead was learning, in that very moment, that their perfect plan had a witness, and the witness had a name. The card sat on Claire's nightstand for 3 days before the phone rang. It wasn't Vincent's number that lit up her screen at 7 in the morning. It was Denise, and her voice was tight in a way Claire had never heard before. "Claire, I need you to come in early today. Like now." "What's wrong?" "There are men here," Denise said, lowering her voice, "asking about the dinner the other night, asking about the staff who worked the private room. They have badges, but they don't feel like police, if you understand what I'm saying to you." A pause. "One of them asked for you by name." Claire's whole body went cold and still. "Did you tell them anything?" "I told them you weren't scheduled today, which is true. But Claire, honey, they said they'd be back." Denise hesitated. "Whatever happened at that table, I don't want it in my restaurant. So if there's something you need to tell me now." "There's nothing," Claire said quietly. "I'll be there in an hour." She hung up before Denise could argue, and she sat on the edge of her bed with her heart pounding, because she understood exactly what had just happened. Vincent had warned her. The person who tried to kill him would learn they'd failed, and they'd come looking for the reason why. 3 days. It had taken them 3 days to trace the failure back to the restaurant, and now they were pulling on the loose thread with her name on it. Claire looked at the blank card, and this time she picked up the phone and dialed. It rang once. "You waited 3 days," Vincent's voice said. No hello. No surprise. "I was beginning to think you'd left the city." "Men came to my restaurant," Claire said. "Badges that aren't police. They asked for me by name." There was a silence on the other end, and when Vincent spoke again, his voice had changed. The calm, almost amused tone from the car was gone. What replaced it was flat and hard and very serious. "Describe them." "I didn't see them. My manager did. 2 men, suits, badges, one older, one younger. They said they'd come back." "Don't go to work," Vincent said. "I have to go to work. If I don't show, I lose the one normal thing I have left." "Miss Morgan?" His voice cut through hers like a blade. "The men at your restaurant are not there to talk. Federal badges are the easiest thing in the world to forge, and the people I'm dealing with have money enough to forge anything. If they know your name, they know your face. And if they know your face, then the only reason you are still breathing is that you happen to be somewhere too public to touch. That will not last." A pause. "There's a car outside your building. Gray sedan across the street. It's been there since last night. Look." Claire moved to the window and pulled the curtain back an inch. The gray sedan was exactly where he said it would be. Her breath caught. "That's mine," Vincent said. "I put it there the night I dropped you off, in case they moved faster than I hoped. The man inside is named Frank. He's going to bring you to me, and we're going to talk about how to keep you alive. Because whether you like it or not, Miss Morgan, we are now in this together." A beat. "Or you can walk to your restaurant and take your chances with the men in the badges. Your choice. It always has been." Claire stared at the gray sedan. She thought about running. She was good at running. She'd done it 4 times before, disappeared and reappeared as someone new, and she could do it again. But running took time and money and preparation, and she had none of those things ready. If she ran now, unprepared, with trained men already watching her door, she wouldn't make it out of the state. Vincent was right. She hated that he was right. "Give me 10 minutes, she said. She packed a small bag in 6. Cash, a spare phone, the towel-wrapped glass. Everything else in the apartment was replaceable, and none of it was really hers anyway. When she came down the stairs and crossed the street, the door of the gray sedan opened before she reached it. The man inside, Frank, was heavy-set and quiet, with the flat, watchful eyes of a professional. He didn't speak until she was in the car. "He said you'd take the glass," Frank said, pulling into traffic. "Said you were the type to hold on to evidence." Claire said nothing. "He also said if I laid a hand on you, he'd feed me to the lake." Frank glanced at her in the mirror. "In 11 years working for that man, I've never heard him say that about anyone. Just so you know what you're walking into." They drove for 40 minutes out of the city and into the wealthy suburbs to the north, where the houses hid behind stone walls and iron gates. Frank pulled up to one of them, a wall taller than the others, and the gate slid open before he even slowed. Inside, the driveway curved through old trees toward a house that wasn't so much a house as a fortress pretending to be one. Vincent was waiting on the steps. He looked different in daylight, less like a magazine photograph, more like a man who hadn't slept. When Claire got out of the car, he came down to meet her, and his eyes went straight to the bag in her hand. "You brought the glass," he said. "You knew I would." "I hoped you would." He nodded toward the house. "Come inside. There are things you need to see, and I'd rather not say them standing in a driveway." The inside of the house was cold and enormous, and almost empty of warmth, the home of a man who owned everything and treasured nothing. Vincent led her to a study lined with books he'd probably never read, and he shut the door, and he gestured for her to sit. "Before we go further," he said, "I owe you an apology. When I let you out of that car, I told myself I was giving you a choice. Stay out of it or come in. But I knew, even then, that they'd come for you. I put a man on your building because I knew." He met her eyes. "So there was never really a choice, and I'm sorry for that. I don't apologize often, Frank can confirm." "Who are they?" Claire asked. "The men with the badges." Vincent walked to a desk and picked up a folder. "That's the question I've been trying to answer for 3 days. And the answer terrifies me, Miss Morgan, which is not something I say lightly." He handed her the folder. "Open it." Claire opened it. Inside were photographs, financial records, a web of names and companies connected by hand-drawn lines. "For the last 2 years," Vincent said, "money has been leaving my organization. Slowly, carefully, small enough amounts that no single accountant would flag it, spread across enough accounts that no single person could see the whole picture. Except me. I see everything. That's why I'm still alive." He tapped the folder. "Someone inside my organization has been building something. A second network, hidden inside my own. Their own soldiers, paid with my money. Their own contacts, their own leverage. For 2 years, someone I trust has been quietly assembling everything they'd need to replace me." Claire looked up from the folder. "The poison wasn't the beginning. The poison was the end," Vincent said grimly. "The poison was the last move. You don't spend 2 years building a shadow army and then get impatient. Whoever did this was ready. The dinner was supposed to be the night it all changed. I die of a heart attack. Tragic. Natural. And by the time my body's cold, someone steps forward, already holding all the pieces, and takes everything." He shook his head slowly. "It was a beautiful plan, Miss Morgan. I almost admire it. It would have worked flawlessly." "Except a waitress moved a glass," Claire said. "Except a waitress moved a glass," Vincent agreed. Claire closed the folder and set it on her knee. Her mind was already moving, already doing the work, and she hated how naturally it came back to her, like she'd never left. "You said someone you trust," she said. "How many people is that? People close enough to arrange poison on your glass? Close enough that your own men wouldn't stop them near the table?" Vincent was quiet for a moment. "Fewer than you'd think. In my world, trust is a currency you spend very carefully." He held up his hand and counted on his fingers. "My head of security, Tomas. He's been with me 20 years. He'd take a bullet for me and nearly has twice." One finger down. "My accountant, Sophia. She's the only person besides me who could move money that quietly. But she has no soldiers, no reach. Money is her only weapon." Another finger. "And Richard Hale, my advisor, my right hand. The man who has stood beside me at every table, in every deal, for 15 years. He lowered his hand slowly. "Those 3. Everyone else is 1 layer further out. Everyone else, my men would have questioned near my glass. Those 3 could have walked up and poured it themselves, and no one would have blinked." Claire studied his face as he spoke, the way she'd studied 1,000 faces, and she saw it. The flicker, the thing he didn't want to say out loud. "You already suspect one of them," she said quietly. "Which one?" Vincent's jaw tightened. "It doesn't matter what I suspect. Suspicion has killed more good men than bullets. I've watched paranoid kings execute their most loyal soldiers over a bad feeling, and I swore I'd never be that man. I need proof, not a feeling. Proof. He looked at her. And that's why you're here, because I can't investigate my own inner circle without them knowing. The moment I start asking questions, whoever it is knows I've survived, and I'm hunting, and they accelerate. But you, he almost smiled. You're a waitress. You're invisible. You're the one person in this whole city they'll never see coming. You already proved that once. Claire set the folder down on the desk. You want me to find out which of your 3 most trusted people is trying to kill you, she said flatly, inside your own organization, where any of them could have me killed the moment they realize what I'm doing. Yes, Vincent said. That's exactly what I want. And if I say no, then I'll protect you as best I can, and I'll hunt them myself, the loud way, and probably die doing it. He shrugged, a tired, honest motion. I'm not going to threaten you, Miss Morgan. I've decided I'm not going to lie to you either, which is new for me and frankly exhausting. So here's the plain truth. I need you. I have never needed anyone, and I need you. And I have nothing to offer you that you want, because you don't want money and you don't want power. All I can offer you is the one thing you told me you can't walk away from. He leaned forward. A chance to stop a death before it happens. Mine, this time. And maybe more than mine, because a man like Richard, or Thomas, or whoever it is, does not build a shadow army to rule gently. Claire was silent for a long time, and she thought about the promise she'd made to herself on the worst night of her old life. Never stand still again. She'd kept that promise once, in a dining room with a glass, and now here it was, asking to be kept again, bigger and more dangerous than before. I have conditions, she said finally. Name them. I'm not your soldier. I don't hurt anyone. I don't kill anyone. I find you the truth, and what you do with it is on you, not me. I won't have blood on my hands, not again. Agreed. And when it's done, I disappear. New name, new city, and you never look for me. You forget Claire Morgan ever existed. Vincent looked at her for a long moment, and something crossed his face that might have been regret. Agreed, he said quietly. Then I need to see everyone, Claire said, standing. All 3. In their natural place, doing their natural work. Because people can lie with their words, Mr. Callahan, but almost nobody can lie with the small things. The way they hold a glass, the way they stand near a door, the way they look at the man they're planning to kill. She looked at him. Get me in the room. I'll do the rest. Vincent stood as well, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked at her not like a puzzle or a debt or a weapon, but like something closer to an equal. There's a dinner in 2 days, he said. My organization gathers once a month. All my key people in one place. Richard, Thomas, Sophia, everyone. He paused. You'll come as staff. A new hire I brought in personally. No one questions who I bring. A dark look. But understand something. If I bring you into that room and the person hunting me realizes you're not just a waitress, they will not hesitate. You saw one attempt on my life. In 2 days, you're going to walk into a room with the person who made it, and you're going to serve them wine and watch them smile. Claire picked up her bag. Then I'd better remember how to be invisible, she said. The next 2 days, Vincent kept her at the estate, in a guest room with a lock she didn't trust, and a window she checked 6 times a night. She barely slept. She spent the hours studying the folder, memorizing the 3 faces, learning the map of the organization the way she used to memorize the map of a hostile city. Thomas, the head of security, broad, scarred, silent, a man who'd survived 20 years in the most dangerous profession on earth, loyal by every account. But loyalty, Claire knew, was just love that hadn't been tested yet, and every man had a price, even if it wasn't money. Sophia, the accountant. Sharp, elegant, precise, the only person who could move the money. But Vincent was right. She had no soldiers, no reach. She could steal a fortune, but she couldn't take a throne, unless she wasn't working alone. And Richard Hale. Claire kept coming back to Richard. 15 years at Vincent's side. The right hand, the man everyone assumed would inherit whatever a man like Vincent left behind. On paper, he had the most to gain and the most access to lose it. But that was exactly what bothered her. It was too clean, too obvious. In her experience, the person who looked most guilty was usually the one being framed, and the person who looked most loyal was usually the one holding the knife. She said as much to Vincent on the second night when he came to check on her. "You suspect Richard," she said. "I can see it in you every time you say his name, but I want you to consider something. If Richard wanted your empire, he'd inherit most of it anyway when you die. Why would he risk everything on murder when Patience would give him the same thing?" Vincent frowned. "Because I'm only 55, Patience could mean 20 more years." "Maybe," Claire said. "Or maybe someone wants you to look at Richard. Maybe someone spent 2 years building a shadow army and made sure every footprint pointed at the one man you'd suspect first." She held his eyes. "The best way to get away with murder isn't to hide the crime. It's to make sure someone else takes the fall for it." Vincent went very quiet. "You think it's Tomas," he said, "or Sophia?" "I think I haven't been in the room yet," Claire said. "And until I am, I don't think anything. That's the only way to do this right. The moment you decide who's guilty, you stop seeing everyone else clearly. I learned that the hard way, and people died because of it. So we don't decide. We watch, we wait, we let them show us." Vincent studied her for a long moment. "You really were good at this," he said. "Whatever it was you did before." "I was," Claire said quietly. "That's not a compliment. Being good at this cost me everything I ever loved. Don't mistake it for something I'm proud of." Something in her voice made him stop, and for a moment, the Mafia boss and the runaway analyst sat in silence, two people who'd both paid too much for the things they were good at. "Who did you lose?" Vincent asked softly. Claire didn't answer. She looked at the window, and her jaw tightened, and she said, "Get me into that room, Mr. Callahan. That's what you're paying for, not my history." Vincent nodded slowly and stood. At the door, he paused. "Callahan is what my enemies call me," he said. "The people I trust call me Vincent." He looked back at her. "You should call me Vincent, given what I'm about to walk you into." And then he was gone, and Claire was alone with the folder and the window and the long, dark hours before a dinner she was almost certain someone wasn't going to survive. The night of the dinner, Claire stood in a borrowed uniform in the kitchen of Vincent's estate, and she felt the old self settle over her like a second skin. The steady hands, the quiet eyes, the stillness. She'd told herself for 4 years that she'd left this woman behind, and now here she was, back like she'd never gone, and the ease of it frightened her more than the danger did. Vincent's people began to arrive at 8. Claire watched them come in from her place by the wall, a tray of drinks in her hands, invisible. And one by one, the 3 faces from the folder walked into the room and became real. Tomas came first, sweeping the room with his eyes before he let Vincent enter, checking every corner, every face, every exit. He looked at Claire for exactly 1 second, clocked her as new and clocked her as harmless, and moved on. His eyes never stopped moving, a man who trusted nothing. But when Vincent entered, something in Tomas's shoulders eased, just slightly, the way a bodyguard relaxes only when the person he's sworn to protect is finally where he can see them. Claire filed it away. You couldn't fake that, not for 20 years. Sophia came next, in a dark blue dress, a leather portfolio under her arm, even at a dinner. She went straight to Vincent, spoke low and fast about numbers, about accounts, about a problem with a shipment. Her hands moved when she talked, precise, controlled. And when Vincent laughed at something she said, she smiled. But the smile didn't reach her eyes, and Claire watched that smile die the instant Vincent turned away. Interesting, but not damning. Half the people in any room smiled with their mouths and not their eyes. Claire did it herself, every shift. And then Richard Hale walked in, and the whole room turned toward him. Claire understood at once why Vincent suspected him. Richard had the easy, warm confidence of a man who belonged everywhere. He shook hands, he clapped shoulders, he remembered names and wives and children. He moved through the room like he already owned it. And when he reached Vincent, he embraced him, actually embraced him, a real hug between 2 men who'd survived 15 years of war together. "You look tired, old friend," Richard said, holding Vincent at arm's length, studying his face with what looked exactly like concern. "You're not sleeping. Don't tell me you're not sleeping. What's eating at you?" "Business," Vincent said easily. It never ends. It ends, Richard said, smiling. It ends the day they put us in the ground, and not 1 second before. So you'd better start sleeping, because I need you alive at least until this North Side deal closes. He laughed, warm and full. After that, feel free to drop dead. The whole table laughed. Claire watched Richard's face as he said it. Feel free to drop dead. A joke. The kind of joke old friends make. And there was nothing in his eyes but warmth. Either Richard Hale was completely innocent, or he was the most dangerous liar Claire had ever seen in her life. And she'd seen some of the best. She moved through the dinner like she was made of air. She poured. She served. She listened. And she watched the three of them the way a hawk watches a field, patient and total. She watched who Vincent's people deferred to, and it was Richard. She watched who controlled the flow of the money talk, and it was Sophia. She watched who never once relaxed, whose hand never strayed far from his jacket, and it was Tomas. And she waited for the small wrong thing. It came an hour into the dinner. Vincent stood to make a toast, the way he always did, and the whole table raised their glasses. Claire was near the wall, watching, and she saw all three of them lift their wine at once. Tomas, Sophia, Richard. And in the half-second before they drank, Claire's trained eyes caught something that stopped her heart. One of them didn't drink. One of them raised the glass, touched it to their lips, and set it back down without swallowing. A tiny motion. A motion no one in 100 would ever notice. The motion of a person who knew, on some deep animal level, not to trust the wine in that room tonight. Claire's blood went cold, because there was only one reason a person would fake drink at Vincent Callahan's table. They knew something the others didn't. And the person who set their glass down untouched, the person whose animal instinct whispered, "Don't drink," the person who smiled and toasted the man they served and did not let a single drop pass their lips, was not the person Vincent suspected. It was the last person in the room Claire expected. Her hands, so steady all night, went still around the tray. She looked again, certain she'd made a mistake, certain her 4 years of rust had finally shown. But no, she'd seen it. She was sure. And now the whole picture began to rotate in her mind, like a glass turned 15 degrees the wrong way, and everything she'd assumed about who was hunting whom began to slide. Across the room, Vincent caught her eye. Just for an instant, a question in his look. Anything? Claire didn't dare answer. Not here. Not with all three of them in the room, one of them watching her the way she was watching them. Because that was the other thing she'd noticed, the thing that made her mouth go dry and her heart slam against her ribs, while she'd been watching the three suspects. One of the three suspects had been watching her. And they'd been watching her, Claire realized, for a lot longer than tonight. She set down her tray with hands she willed to stay steady, and she walked toward the kitchen at exactly the pace of a waitress with nothing to hide, and every step of the way she felt those eyes follow her, patient and cold and certain. The eyes of someone who had just recognized, across a crowded room, that the new waitress was not new at all. The eyes of the person who had painted poison on a glass 3 nights ago and set it down with a steady hand. They knew her now. And as Claire pushed through the kitchen doors and finally let herself breathe, she understood, with a sick and total certainty, that the hunt she'd agreed to was already over before it began. Because she hadn't found the killer tonight. The killer had found her. Claire didn't tell Vincent that night. She wanted to. Every instinct in her screamed to pull him aside, to say the name, to end it. But she'd been in enough of these rooms to know that the worst thing you can do when the hunter has spotted you is let them see that you know. So she finished the dinner. She poured the last of the wine. She smiled her small, invisible smile, and she walked out of that estate at midnight, as if nothing had changed, while the person who'd recognized her watched her go. It wasn't until the gray sedan had carried her back to a safe house Vincent kept in the city, until the door was locked and Frank was posted outside it, that she finally let herself shake. Vincent came at 1 in the morning. He didn't knock. He let himself in, and he found her sitting at the kitchen table with the towel-wrapped glass in front of her, staring at nothing. "You saw something," he said. It wasn't a question. "You've had that look all night. Tell me." "Sit down, Vincent." He sat, and that alone told her how much had changed between them, that the most feared man in Chicago sat down when a waitress told him to. "During your toast," Claire said, "everyone raised their glass and everyone drank." She paused. "Except one person. One person raised the glass, touched it to their lips, and set it back down without swallowing a drop." Vincent's face didn't move, but his hands did. They went flat on the table, slow and deliberate. "Who?" he said. "There's only one reason a person doesn't drink the wine at a table where poison was used 3 nights ago," Claire went on, ignoring the question. "It's not caution. Everyone at that table has been drinking your wine for years and never worried once. It's knowledge. Somewhere in the back of their mind, an alarm went off that said, 'Not tonight. Don't trust it tonight.' And only one kind of person has that alarm." She looked at him. The kind who put poison in a glass and is terrified someone might return the favor. "Claire," Vincent's voice was very low now, "who didn't drink?" And Claire told him. "Tomas." Vincent went completely still. For a long moment he didn't speak, didn't breathe, and Claire watched 20 years of trust war with what she'd just told him. She understood. She'd asked him to suspect Richard. She'd built a careful case for why the obvious suspect was probably innocent, and now she'd handed him the one name he'd defended without hesitation. The man who'd taken 2 bullets for him, the man whose loyalty he'd staked his life on for 2 decades. "No," Vincent said finally. "No, you're wrong. I know what I saw. Thomas has protected me for 20 years. He's bled for me. He's killed for me. If Thomas wanted me dead, Claire, I'd have been dead 19 years ago. He's had 1,000 chances." Vincent shook his head hard. "A man doesn't wait 20 years to betray you. That's not how betrayal works." "Isn't it?" Claire said quietly. "You told me yourself. Someone's been building a shadow army for 2 years. 2 years of patience. 2 years of pretending. You think a person capable of that kind of patience couldn't wait 20 years for the right moment?" She leaned forward. "And think about who has the reach to build an army inside your organization. Not Sophia. She has money but no soldiers. Not Richard. He's your face, your voice, but the men answer to their captains, and the captains answer to your head of security. They answer to Tomas. Tomas is the only one of the 3 who could quietly turn your own soldiers one at a time, and no one would ever question a head of security spending time with the men. That's his job." Vincent's jaw worked. She could see it landing piece by piece, and she could see how much he hated it. "You defended him first, Vincent," Claire said gently. "When you counted your 3, he was the first name off your fingers, the bodyguard who'd take a bullet. You never once suspected him, and that's exactly why it works. The perfect traitor isn't the man you watch. It's the man you've stopped watching entirely, because you decided long ago that he was safe." Vincent stood up so fast the chair scraped. He walked to the window, his back to her, and he stood there a long time. "If you're wrong," he said finally, "and I move against Tomas, I lose the one man who's genuinely kept me alive. I hand my enemies exactly what they want, a king who turned on his own shield." "I know. And if you're right," he said, turning, "then the man watching my back has been holding a knife the whole time." His voice cracked, just slightly, just enough for Claire to hear the grief under the fury. "Do you understand what you're asking me to believe?" "I do," Claire said, "which is why we're not going to move on a feeling. Not yours about Richard, and not mine about Thomas. I told you from the start. We don't decide. We get proof. And now that I know where to look, I know how to get it." That was 2 nights ago. For 2 days, Claire worked. Quietly, patiently, the way she used to, she pulled at the thread. Vincent gave her access to everything. The financial records, the movements of his men, the schedules and the shipments and the accounts. And she followed the money the way you follow a trail of blood, and it led exactly where she'd feared it would. The Shadow Army was real. She confirmed it in a single afternoon. Dozens of Vincent's soldiers drawing extra pay from accounts that traced back through 6 shells to a single origin. Loyalty, bought quietly over 2 years, and every one of those soldiers reported in the ordinary chain of command to a captain who reported to the head of security, to Tomas. But that wasn't proof. That was circumstance. A defense lawyer would say Tomas oversaw all the men. Of course, the trail ran through him. That meant nothing. Claire needed more. She needed Tomas himself, doing the thing, saying the thing. Somewhere she could catch it. And on the third day she got her chance, and it nearly killed her. Vincent had arranged for her to be present at a meeting between Tomas and one of the captains, a man named Delgado, in a warehouse Vincent used for storage. Claire was there as staff again, bringing coffee, invisible. Vincent's idea, and a good one. She'd stand in the corner, pour the coffee, and listen. And maybe Tomas would say something that couldn't be explained away. What Claire didn't know, what Vincent didn't know, was that the meeting was a trap. Not for her. She only realized that later. The meeting was Tomas's move, the beginning of the end he'd been building toward for 2 years. Delgado wasn't there to take orders. He was there to receive the final go-ahead. And Claire walked into the middle of it with a coffee pot in her hand. She knew something was wrong the moment she entered. There were too many men, 6, where there should have been 2. And they didn't have the loose posture of soldiers waiting through a boring meeting. They had the tight, ready stillness of men waiting for something to begin. Claire poured the coffee. Her hands stayed steady, but her mind was already screaming. "You're new," Tomas said, without looking at her. He was seated at a metal table, and he was cleaning a handgun, slowly, methodically. "Vincent brought you in himself, personally. That's unusual for him." "He's very particular about his coffee," Claire said. Tomas smiled, and it was not a warm smile. "He is. He's particular about everything. It's why he's survived so long." He set down the gun and looked at her for the first time, and his flat, cold eyes went over her face slowly. "You know what else he's particular about? People. Vincent doesn't bring strangers close. In 20 years, I've watched him keep the whole world at arm's length. And then 3 nights ago, he nearly dies at a dinner, and suddenly there's a new waitress he brought in himself." He tilted his head. "You see how that looks to a careful man?" Claire set down the coffee pot with the precise calm of someone who was not about to run. "I just pour the coffee, sir." "No," Tomas said softly. "You don't." He stood up. "I've been in security my whole life, and I know a professional when I see one. The way you came into this room, the way you counted us, the way you clock the exits before you clock the coffee cups. You're not a waitress." He picked the gun back up, not pointing it, just holding it. "You're the reason Vincent's still breathing. You moved the glass." The room went very quiet. And here was the moment Claire's whole life had trained her for. 6 armed men, a confirmed traitor holding a gun, and no way out but through. She'd been in rooms like this before, in her old life, and she'd survived them not by being the strongest or the fastest, but by being the calmest. By understanding that panic was the only thing in the room that could truly kill her. So she didn't panic. "If you shoot me," Claire said quietly, "Vincent knows exactly where I am tonight. He knows who I'm with. And a waitress turning up dead the same week someone tried to poison him tells him everything he needs to know about who to trust." She met Tomas's eyes without flinching. "You've spent 2 years being patient, Tomas. Being careful. Building something in the shadows so nobody would ever see it coming. Are you really going to blow all that patience because a woman poured your coffee? Vincent already suspects someone. Give him a body and you tell him who." She watched it land. She watched the professional in Tomas do the math she'd laid out for him, and she watched him hate that the math was right. "Smart," Tomas said. "You're very smart." He lowered the gun. "But smart people have a weakness. They think being right keeps them alive." He nodded to one of his men. "It doesn't. Being useful keeps you alive. And you, whoever you are, just became a lot more useful to me alive than dead." He stepped closer. "Because you're going to walk back to Vincent tonight, and you're going to tell him the meeting was nothing. Boring logistics. Nothing to worry about. And you're going to keep telling him that right up until the moment I don't need him anymore. And if I don't?" "Then I stop being patient," Tomas said. "And I stop being careful. And I put you and Vincent in the ground on the same night and let the pieces fall where they fall. I'd rather not. Patience has gotten me this far. But I've come too far to lose it over one clever waitress. Test me and find out." He smiled again. "So, do we have an understanding?" And Claire understood. in that instant, that she'd walked into something far more dangerous than she'd realized, and that the only way out of this room alive was to make Tomas believe he'd won. "We have an understanding," she said. "Good." Tomas gestured to the door. "Frank's waiting outside. Go pour Vincent his coffee. Tell him everything's fine. And Claire, or whatever your name is." He waited until she was at the door. "I'll be watching you now, every move, so be very, very careful whose glass you decide to move next." Claire walked out of that warehouse on legs that didn't feel like her own, and she got into the gray sedan, and Frank pulled away, and it wasn't until they were a mile down the road that she let herself understand what had just happened. Tomas hadn't just confirmed he was the traitor. He'd made her part of it. He thought he owned her now. He thought she'd go back to Vincent and lie. And that gave her something no amount of financial records ever could. It gave her a traitor who believed his secret was safe, who would keep moving, keep talking, keep making his final preparations, all while thinking his enemy's greatest asset was now his own. He'd made a mistake. He'd made the same mistake everyone made about Claire Morgan. He'd looked at her and seen someone he could control. "Frank," Claire said quietly, "I need you to take me to Vincent. Right now. And I need you to check this car for anything Tomas's men might have put on it while I was inside. A tracker, a microphone, anything." Frank's eyes flicked to the mirror. "You think they bugged the car?" "I think Tomas just told me he's watching my every move," Claire said. "And I think a man that careful doesn't say that unless he's already made it true." They found the tracker under the rear bumper, a small magnetic thing, exactly where Claire expected it. She held it in her palm, and she thought for a long moment, and then instead of destroying it, she smiled. "Leave it on," she told Frank. "You want them tracking us?" "I want them tracking this car," Claire said. "Which means from now on, this car goes exactly where I want Tomas to think I am, and I go somewhere else." She closed her fist around the tracker. "He thinks he turned me into his eyes inside Vincent's camp. Fine. Let him think it. A man who believes he's watching you is a man who's stopped hiding from you." When she reached Vincent, she told him everything. The warehouse, the 6 men, the gun, the threat. And Vincent listened with a face that grew stonier and grayer with every word, and when she finished, he sat in silence for a long time. "He held a gun on you," Vincent said finally. His voice was terrible in its quietness. "Tomas held a gun on you and threatened to bury you next to me." "Yes." 20 years. Vincent closed his eyes. 20 years, Claire. I gave him everything. I trusted him with my life, and he was measuring me for a grave the whole time. When he opened his eyes, there was something in them she hadn't seen before, and it frightened her, because it was grief and it was rage, and underneath both of those was something colder. "I want him dead. Tonight." "No," Claire said sharply. "Claire, listen to me. If you kill Tomas tonight, you win nothing. You still don't know how deep the Shadow Army goes. You don't know which of your captains are his and which are still yours. You kill Tomas, and you inherit a war with an enemy whose face you can't see, hidden inside your own men." She stood. "Right now, Tomas thinks he's won. He thinks he owns me. He thinks his plan is still on schedule and his secret is still safe. That is the single most valuable thing we have, and if you kill him tonight, you throw it away." She held his eyes. "Let him keep believing. Let him keep moving. He'll show us the whole network, every soldier, every account, every captain, because he thinks no one's watching. And when we know all of it, we take all of it at once in a single night. Not just Tomas, everything." Vincent stared at her. The rage was still there, but under it, slowly, the strategist was waking up. The man who'd survived 30 years by thinking, not feeling. "You want to let the man who tried to kill me keep walking free," he said slowly. "Keep planning my murder, so we can catch all of them at once." "I want to win," Claire said. "Not just survive, win. There's a difference, and you taught it to me the first night. In your car, do you remember? You said stopping one enemy doesn't erase the danger. Well, killing Tomas tonight stops one enemy. Waiting stops all of them." She paused. but it means you have to do the hardest thing you've ever done. You have to see Tomas tomorrow and the day after and shake his hand and smile and let him think you have no idea. Can you do that?" Vincent was quiet for a long time. "I've been pretending my whole life," he said finally, bitterly. "I can pretend a little longer." He looked at her. "But there's a problem with your plan, Claire, a serious one. You said Tomas thinks he owns you now, that you'll feed me lies, which means for this to work, Tomas has to keep believing that, which means you have to keep meeting him, keep taking his orders, keep walking into rooms full of his men alone, playing a double game where one wrong word gets you killed." His jaw tightened. "You'd be the most exposed person in this entire war. Not me. You." Claire had already thought of that. She'd thought of it in the warehouse, with the gun in Tomas's hand. "I know," she said quietly. "I promised I wouldn't put you in danger and walk away," Vincent said. "This is worse. This is putting you in the center of it and asking you to stay." "You're not asking," Claire said. "I'm choosing. There's a difference, and it matters to me." She sat back down across from him. "I spent 4 years running from what I used to be. And every day of those 4 years, I told myself I ran because that life was wrong, because it hurt people, because power treats lives like game pieces." She looked down at her hands. "But that wasn't the whole truth. Part of me ran because I was afraid of how good I was at it, afraid that if I ever stepped back in, I'd never be able to step back out." She looked up. "Well, I'm back in, and I'm not afraid anymore, so let's finish it, all of it, and then I'll disappear, and this time I won't be running. I'll be walking." Vincent looked at her for a long moment, and something passed over his face that had nothing to do with strategy or survival, something closer to wonder, and something closer to sorrow. "You know," he said, "I've had hundreds of people work for me. Soldiers, killers, men who'd die on my order without asking why." He shook his head slowly. "Not one of them ever scared me the way you do, because every one of them wanted something I could give. And you want the one thing I've never once been able to give anyone, to be left alone." He almost smiled. "I don't know how to hold on to a person like that, so I suppose I'll have to help you leave." For 3 days after that, the plan worked. Tomas met Claire twice, in dark places, and both times she played her part flawlessly. She fed him small truths and useful lies. She let him believe Vincent was distracted, unsuspecting, still hunting in the wrong direction. And Tomas, sure now that he held all the cards, grew bolder. He talked more. He showed her more. And every word he spoke, every name he dropped, every account he mentioned, Claire carried back to Vincent. And the picture of the Shadow Army grew clearer and clearer until they could see almost all of it. Almost. And then, on the 4th day, everything Claire thought she knew turned inside out. She was going through the financial records one last time, cross-checking the shadow accounts against Tomas's movements, tying the final knots, when she found it. A payment. Buried 6 layers deep, older than all the others. The first payment. The seed money that had started the whole Shadow Army 2 years ago, before Tomas had recruited a single soldier. And it hadn't come from Tomas. Claire stared at the screen, and her blood turned to ice, and the whole story she'd built rotated once more, all the way around, and she saw, finally, what had been hidden underneath everything from the very beginning. Tomas hadn't built the Shadow Army. Tomas had been given the money to build it. Someone had funded him. Someone had put the first seed in his hand 2 years ago and said, "Build me an army inside Vincent's house." And Tomas, ambitious and patient and cold, had done exactly that, believing the empire would be his at the end. But it wasn't going to be his. He was a tool, a blade being pointed by a hand he couldn't see. The soldiers thought they served Tomas. Tomas thought he served himself. And above him, invisible, patient beyond anything Claire had imagined, was the person who'd been moving all of them, Vincent included, like glasses on a table. The payment traced back through the shells, and Claire followed it, her heart pounding, until it reached the single account at the very bottom. The origin. The hand behind the hand. And when she saw whose name was on it, Claire stopped breathing. Because it wasn't Tomas, and it wasn't Richard. It was the one person in Vincent's entire world that neither of them had ever, for one single second, thought to suspect. The one person Vincent trusted so completely that her name had come off his fingers not as a threat, but as an afterthought. The one person whose only weapon, Vincent had said, was money. Sophia, the accountant. The quiet woman in this blue dress who smiled and let the smile die the moment Vincent turned away. She hadn't been hiding rage that night. She'd been hiding triumph, because she was the only person alive who could move money that quietly, and she'd used that gift to build the very thing that was going to kill the man she served. She'd funded Tomas. She'd pointed him at Vincent like a gun. And when Tomas won, when Tomas took the empire believing it was his, Sophia would be the one holding the only thing that truly mattered in Vincent's world. The money, all of it, and a new king who didn't even know he was already owned. Claire's hands were shaking now, and not from fear, because she finally understood the thing Tomas didn't. She understood why he hadn't drunk the wine. It wasn't only that he'd used poison and feared it in return. It was that Tomas, careful as he was, had started to suspect he wasn't the only player at the table. He'd started to feel the second hand moving him. And a man who feels invisible strings on his own arms stops trusting the wine, stops trusting everyone, because he's realized too late that he was never the hunter at all. He was just a longer knife in someone else's grip. And somewhere across the city, at that very moment, Claire's phone lit up with a message from a number she didn't recognize. She looked down at it, and the last of the warmth drained out of her body, because the message was 3 words long, and it changed everything one final time. It said, "I know you know," and it was signed simply with a single letter. S. Claire stared at those 3 words until they blurred. I know you know. She didn't move. She didn't breathe. Her mind, trained for exactly this, ran through the possibilities at lightning speed, and every single one of them was bad. Sophia knew Claire had found the payment, which meant Sophia had been watching the records too, had built some quiet alarm into the deepest account, a tripwire that fired the moment anyone dug too far, and Claire had just stepped on it. She'd thought she was the invisible one. She'd thought she was the hunter watching the table, and the whole time there had been another set of eyes, patient beyond anything, watching her watch everyone else. Claire's phone buzzed again. Don't tell Vincent, not yet. You'll want to hear what I have to say first, because you've got the story wrong, Waitress. You've got it very wrong. Meet me. Come alone. You know I could have killed you a dozen times already. If I wanted you dead, we wouldn't be talking. An address followed, a coffee shop, downtown, public, crowded, 9 a.m. Claire set the phone down with a hand that had gone cold and steady, the way it always did when the danger became real enough to stop being frightening. And she thought, every instinct she had said don't go. Going alone to meet the person who'd orchestrated everything, who'd outthought all of them, who'd moved Vincent and Tomas and even Claire herself around like pieces on a board, was insane. It was walking willingly into the spider's web. But there was one line in that message that Claire couldn't stop turning over. You've got the story wrong. And underneath her fear, underneath her training, the part of Claire that had never stopped needing to know the truth, the part that had cost her everything in her old life, whispered that Sophia might be telling the truth. Because Claire had gotten the story wrong once already. She'd been sure it was Richard, then sure it was Tomas, and both times she'd been standing right there in the room, watching with the best eyes in the business, and both times she'd missed the hand behind the hand. What if she was still missing something? She called Vincent. I found who funded Tomas, she said without preamble. It's Sophia. The seed money, 2 years ago, before Tomas recruited anyone. It traces to her. She built the shadow army through him. He thinks he's the one taking your empire. He's not. He's her weapon. When he wins, she owns him, and she owns everything. The silence on the line was so long Claire thought the call had dropped. Sophia, Vincent said finally, and his voice was hollow. Sophia has managed my money for 8 years. She knows every account I have, every dollar, every secret. A long breath. If it's her, then she hasn't just been planning to take the empire. She's had her hand on my throat this entire time, and I never felt it. There's more, Claire said. She contacted me, 20 minutes ago. She knows I found the payment. She wants to meet, alone, this morning. She says I have the story wrong." "No!" Vincent's voice snapped back to life, hard and immediate. "Absolutely not. You are not meeting Sophia alone. That woman has spent 2 years being 3 moves ahead of everyone, including me. Whatever she wants from that meeting, it's not to tell you the truth. It's a trap, Claire, and you're smart enough to see it." "Maybe," Claire said. "Probably, but think about it, Vincent. If she wanted me dead, I'd be dead. She's had every opportunity. She's known who I am since the dinner, maybe before. She let me keep digging. She let me find Tomas. She let me find the payment. Why? Why would a woman that careful let me get this close unless she wanted me to get this close?" Claire paused. "She's not trying to kill me. She's trying to recruit me. Or she's trying to tell me something. Either way, it's the first chance we've had to look the real enemy in the eye. And I'm not going to waste it hiding behind your walls." "Claire, it's a public place, crowded, 9 in the morning. She can't touch me there without 100 witnesses, and she knows it. That's why she chose it." Claire was already pulling on her coat. "I'll wear a wire. Frank can be across the street. If it goes wrong, you'll know in real time. But I have to hear what she says, Vincent. Because if I've had the story wrong twice, I need to make absolutely sure I don't have it wrong a 3rd time before we make our move. One mistake now, and we lose everything." Vincent was quiet for a moment. "You're the most stubborn person I've ever met," he said finally, tiredly. "And I run an organization built entirely on stubborn men. Is that a yes?" "It's a yes with conditions. You wear the wire. Frank is across the street with 2 men. And Claire." His voice dropped. "If she says one word that makes you think you're in danger, you walk out. You don't try to win the conversation. You don't try to get one more piece. You walk. Promise me." "I promise," Claire said. She was lying, and they both probably knew it. At 9 that morning, Claire walked into the coffee shop. It was exactly as promised, crowded, warm, ordinary, people typing on laptops, mothers with strollers, the hiss and clatter of an ordinary morning. And at a small table near the back, in a gray coat instead of the blue dress, sat Sophia. She looked up as Claire approached, and she smiled, and this time the smile reached her eyes, which was somehow more frightening than if it hadn't. "You came," Sophia said. "I wasn't sure you would. Vincent would have told you not to." She gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit, please. I already ordered you a coffee. Black, no sugar. That's how you take it, isn't it?" Her smile widened slightly. "I've been watching you a long time, Claire. Longer than you'd believe." Claire sat, but she didn't touch the coffee. "Smart," Sophia said, noticing. "You don't drink anything I've had access to. Good instincts. Tomas has the same instinct now, poor man. He started to realize he's not as much in control as he thought, and it's making him paranoid. He didn't drink Vincent's wine at the dinner, did he? You caught that. That's how you first suspected him." She shook her head almost fondly. "You're very good. It's a genuine pleasure to finally sit across from someone who sees the way I see. Do you know how lonely it is, being the smartest person in every room and having to hide it?" "You said I have the story wrong," Claire said flatly. "So tell me the story." Sophia's smile faded into something more serious. "You think I'm trying to steal Vincent's empire?" she said. "You think I funded Tomas, pointed him at Vincent? And I'm going to take everything when Tomas does the dirty work. That's the story you've built. And it's almost right." She leaned forward. "But you're missing the why, and the why changes everything." She wrapped her hands around her own cup. "I don't want Vincent's empire, Claire. I want it gone. There's a difference, and it's the whole difference in the world." Claire said nothing. She watched. She listened. 8 years ago, I came to work for Vincent as an accountant, Sophia said. A real one, legitimate. I didn't know what he was. By the time I understood, I was in too deep to leave, because people who understand Vincent's finances don't get to quit. They get to keep working, or they get to disappear. Her jaw tightened. But that's not the part that matters. The part that matters is what I learned over 8 years moving his money. I learned where it came from, not the investments, the other money, the real money. She looked at Claire. "Do you know what Vincent Callahan's organization actually does, underneath the restaurants and the deals and the charity galas? Do you know what generates the cash I've spent 8 years hiding?" "Tell me," Claire said quietly. "People," Sophia said. It moves people, across borders, against their will. Women, mostly. Girls. Her voice didn't rise, but something terrible came into it. For 8 years, I've laundered the profits of the ugliest business there is, and I've smiled at galas, and I've told myself I had no choice. And then 2 years ago, I decided I was done telling myself that. She met Claire's eyes. I couldn't go to the police. Vincent owns half of them, and the other half would get me killed before I finished my statement. I couldn't run. He'd find me, so I did the only thing I could do. I decided to burn the whole thing down from the inside, and to do that, I needed a fire. Thomas, Claire said. Tomas, Sophia agreed. Ambitious, cold, patient, everything a good fire needs. I gave him the money and the idea and let him believe it was his own. I pointed him at Vincent. Because when Tomas moves, Claire, when he finally takes his shot, it's going to tear the whole organization apart. The captains will split. The soldiers will turn on each other. And in the chaos, every account I've spent 2 years quietly documenting, every name, every route, every crime, is going to end up in the hands of the one kind of person Vincent can't buy or kill. She paused. Federal agents. Real ones. In another city, another jurisdiction, far from Vincent's reach. I've spent 2 years building the case that ends this. Tomas is just the match. Claire sat very still, because if this was true, it turned everything upside down one more time. It meant Sophia wasn't the villain at the bottom of the pile. It meant she was something far more complicated, a woman trapped in a monster's house, trying to burn it down and not die in the fire. But Claire had been fooled before, twice, and she was not going to be fooled a third time by a good story told by a very smart woman. That's a beautiful story, Claire said. It has a hero and everything. You. The reluctant accountant burning down the empire to save the innocent. She held Sophia's eyes. There's just one problem with it. If all you wanted was to bring Vincent down and get evidence to the feds, you'd have done it quietly. You'd never have needed to fund a war. You'd never have needed to arrange a poisoning at a dinner where you could have gotten caught. So tell me the real reason you built a shadow army instead of just mailing a hard drive to the FBI. Because a woman as smart as you, Sophia, doesn't start a war when a letter would do. Sophia looked at her for a long moment, and then slowly she smiled again, and this time there was something almost like respect in it. You really are good, she said softly. You're right, there's more. She turned her cup slowly on the table. A hard drive of evidence brings down the organization. It doesn't bring down Vincent. Men like Vincent have lawyers, deals, information to trade. He'd inform on 100 people to save himself, and in 3 years he'd be out, living somewhere warm, and the whole thing would rebuild under someone new. Her voice went cold and flat. I don't want the organization to fall and Vincent to walk. I want Vincent to die inside it. I want him to die believing he lost his empire to his own bodyguard, betrayed and outmaneuvered, never knowing that the person who really did it was the quiet accountant he never once looked at twice. She looked up. The poison at the dinner wasn't Tomas's idea. It was mine. I fed it to him. I wanted Vincent dead, and I wanted Tomas to take the blame, and I wanted the whole thing to collapse in a single beautiful night. Her eyes hardened. And then a waitress moved a glass and ruined the most perfect plan I've ever built. There it was. The truth under the truth. Sophia wasn't a reluctant hero. She wasn't a monster either. She was something worse and sadder than both. She was a person who had been broken by a monster and had decided to become a smaller, colder monster to destroy him, and had convinced herself the innocent people she was using along the way were an acceptable price. She was, Claire realized, exactly what Claire herself might have become if Claire hadn't run. So now you know, Sophia said, the whole story, and here's why I brought you here, Claire, instead of killing you. She leaned in. You saved Vincent's life once, but you're not loyal to him. You don't even like him. You saved him because you can't stand to watch someone die when you could stop it. I've watched you long enough to know that about you. So I'm going to give you a choice, one professional to another. Her voice dropped. The organization is coming down, one way or another. Tomas is going to move in 3 days. When he does, it all burns. You can't stop that now. It's too far gone. But you can choose what you do in the fire. She held Claire's gaze. Walk away, take Vincent's money, disappear, become someone new, the way you're so good at doing. Let Vincent reap what he's sown, or stand with him and burn with him for a man who has spent his life doing things that would make you sick if you knew them all. She sat back. I'm not your enemy, Claire. I never was. I just want the same thing you claimed to want when you left your old life. I want the monsters to stop. I'm just willing to become one to do it. Claire was silent for a long time, and when she finally spoke, her voice was quiet and steady and certain in a way that surprised even her. You're wrong about me, Claire said. You've watched me for weeks, and you still got me wrong, the same way you got Vincent wrong. Mine. She leaned forward. You think I saved Vincent because I can't watch a man die. That's true, but you left out the rest of it. I can't watch anyone die, Sophia. Not Vincent. Not the innocent people whose evidence you're going to spill into a war zone. Not the soldiers you're going to get killed in the chaos you're planning. Not the girls who are still in Vincent's pipeline right now this morning who don't have 3 days to wait for your beautiful fire. Her voice hardened. You want to burn it all down and call the ashes justice. But there are people inside that fire who never got a vote, and I've already lived through what happens when someone decides a few innocent lives are an acceptable price for the right outcome. Her jaw tightened. That's why I ran, Sophia. Not because I was too weak for that world, because I refused to keep paying that price. And I'm not going to start paying it again for you. Sophia's face went cold. Then you've chosen the monster, she said. No, Claire said, standing. I've chosen the people in the fire, all of them, including you if you'd let me. Because underneath all this, Sophia, I think you're still the woman who couldn't stomach what Vincent does. And there's a version of this where the organization comes down, and the girls get out, and the evidence reaches the right hands, and nobody innocent dies in a war you started to feel powerful. She looked down at her. But that version doesn't have Vincent dying betrayed and confused for your satisfaction. That version has justice instead of revenge, and I don't think you want justice anymore. I think you've wanted revenge so long you can't tell the difference. I know, because I couldn't either. Once. For just a moment, something flickered across Sophia's face, something young and wounded and human underneath all the ice. And then it was gone, sealed over, and the cold accountant looked back at Claire with nothing in her eyes at all. 3 days, Sophia said quietly. Tomas moves in 3 days. I'd take Vincent's money and run if I were you. But you're not me. You never were. That was always the difference between us, Claire. You still think you can save people. She picked up her coffee. You can't. Not in this world. Now go. Tell Vincent whatever you like. It won't matter. I'm already 3 moves ahead. I always am. Claire walked out. She got into the gray sedan where Frank was waiting, and she didn't speak until they were 4 blocks away. And then she said very quietly, Did Vincent hear all of that? Every word, Frank said. His face was gray. He's waiting for you at the estate, Claire. He glanced back at her. In 11 years, I've never heard him not say anything. He hasn't said a word since she started talking about the girls. Not one. Claire found Vincent in his study, standing at the window with his back to the door, exactly as he'd stood the first night she'd told him someone he trusted was trying to kill him. He didn't turn when she came in. You heard it all, Claire said. I heard it all. Is it true? She asked. The organization, what it really does, the people it moves. She needed to hear him say it. She needed to know if the man she'd been helping was the thing Sophia said he was. Tell me the truth, Vincent. You promised me you wouldn't lie to me. So don't start now. Vincent was silent for a long, long time. And then he said, in a voice she'd never heard from him, small and old and stripped of all its power, Yes. Claire closed her eyes. It's true, Vincent said. Not all of it. Sophia makes it sound like it's all I do. It isn't. But it's part of it. It's part of the money. He still didn't turn around. I inherited that part of the business from the man who built this organization before me. I told myself for 30 years that if I didn't run it, someone worse would. That I kept it smaller than it could be. That I saved money for the girls' medical care. That I punished the men who were cruel. His voice cracked. I told myself 1,000 stories, Claire. Every single one of them designed to let me sleep at night. And they worked. For 30 years they worked. He finally turned, and his face was wet. And then a waitress saved my life for no reason and asked for nothing, and looked at me like I was a man responsible for his choices instead of a king who was owed his crown, and the story stopped working. Claire stood very still. "Sophia's right about what I am," Vincent said. "She's wrong about what to do with it. She wants me dead, and she's willing to spill blood across half the city and burn 100 innocent people to get it. That's not justice. That's just my own logic wearing a hero's coat. Some deaths are acceptable for the right outcome. That's the exact thinking that built everything she claims to hate." He wiped his face roughly. "But she's right that this has to end. All of it. Not just Tomas. Not just the Shadow Army. The whole thing. The part I've been lying to myself about for 30 years. Claire looked at him, and she saw for the first time not the Mafia boss and not the tired man, but something in between. A person standing at the exact edge she'd once stood at herself, looking down into the choice that would define the rest of his life. "Then we do it differently than Sophia," Claire said quietly. "We don't burn it down, we take it apart, carefully, so the people in the fire get out." She stepped closer. "The girls first, before anything else. Before we move on Tomas, before we touch Sophia, before we do a single other thing, we get every person in that pipeline out and safe. That's the first move, not the last. The first." Vincent looked at her, and something shifted in his face. "You're asking me to dismantle the most profitable part of my organization," he said, "voluntarily, which will tell every enemy I have that I've gone soft, that I've turned, that I'm vulnerable. It's practically suicide." "Yes," Claire said, "it is, and you're going to do it anyway, because Sophia was right about one thing. A hard drive of evidence lets you inform your way out and rebuild. But a man who chooses, on his own, to tear down the worst thing he ever built and get the innocent out first, before saving himself, before it's safe, that man isn't informing his way out of anything. That man is doing the one thing you've never done in 30 years. She held his eyes. "The right thing. When it costs you everything. When nobody's making you. When there's no story left to tell yourself except the true one." Vincent stared at her. "Why?" he said hoarsely. "Why do you care what I become? You don't like me. You said so. You saved me by accident. You're leaving the moment this is done. Why does it matter to you whether I die a monster or die a man?" And Claire, who had kept her own history locked away through all of this, who had refused every time he'd asked, finally told him the last piece of the truth. "Because the mission that ended my old life," she said quietly, "the one where innocent people died because someone decided their lives were an acceptable price, the person who made that decision wasn't a stranger, Vincent. It was me." Her voice was barely a whisper now. "I was the one with the power. I was the one who ran the numbers and decided the outcome was worth it. And innocent people died because I couldn't tell the difference between justice and just winning." She met his eyes. "I've spent 4 years trying to become someone who would have made a different choice. And I can't go back and save the people I lost. But I can stand in this room right now and help one more person choose to be better than the worst thing they've done." She swallowed hard. "That's why it matters. Not because of you, because of me. Because I need to know it's possible. That a person can be the villain and still choose at the end to do one right thing when everything says, don't." The room was completely silent, and Vincent Callahan, the most feared man in Chicago, looked at the quiet waitress who'd saved his life and understood, finally, that she hadn't been trying to save him at all. She'd been trying to save herself, and the only way she knew how was to make sure that this time, in this room, the person with the power made the choice she couldn't make all those years ago. 3 days, Vincent said finally, his voice steadying, hardening, becoming something new. "Sophia says Tomas moves in 3 days. That's how long we have." He wiped his face one last time and stood up straight, and when he looked at Claire, there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Not the coldness of a king, the resolve of a man who'd finally stopped lying to himself. "Then we have 3 days to get the girls out, gather the real evidence, corner Tomas, and stop Sophia from burning innocent people alive in a war she thinks is justice." He almost smiled. "All at once, in a single night, the way you said, not just survive, win." "Not win," Claire said quietly. "Do right. There's a difference. You taught me that, 30 years too late." Vincent looked at her for a long moment. "Then let's do right," he said. "God help us both." And outside the window, the Chicago sky was already darkening toward the longest 3 days either of them had ever faced, while somewhere across the city, Sophia was already making her next move, and Tomas was cleaning his gun, and the clock that had started the moment a waitress switched a glass was finally, quietly, beginning to run out. The first day they moved the girls. It was the hardest thing Claire had ever helped plan, harder than any operation in her old life, because there was no room for error and no one they could fully trust. Vincent gave her the locations, all of them, every safe house and holding site in his pipeline, and Claire's stomach turned as the list grew, because behind every address was a person who'd been waiting for someone to come. "If Tomas learns we're moving them, he'll know something's changed," Vincent said. "If Sophia learns, she may accelerate. We have one chance to do this quietly." "Then we don't tell your men why," Claire said. "We tell them the sites are compromised, that federal attention is coming, that you're relocating assets to protect the operation. It's not even a lie. We just don't tell them the assets are getting free instead of relocated." Vincent looked at her with something like awe. "You think like the person who trained you." "I think like the person I'm trying to stop being," Claire said. "There's a difference. Let's move." They used Vincent's most loyal men, the ones Tomas hadn't turned, and they used the cover of an ordinary business shuffle, and over 18 brutal hours, they emptied the pipeline. Frank drove 3 of the runs himself, and when the last van pulled away toward a shelter 2 states over, run by people Sophia had never touched and Vincent didn't own, Claire stood in an empty holding site and shook so hard she had to sit down on the floor. 41 people, Vincent said quietly behind her. 41. That's how many were in my pipeline this morning. His voice was hollow. I never let myself count before. In 30 years, I never once let myself count. Count now, Claire said. Every one. Carry it. That's the price of what you were. You don't get to put it down. Vincent was silent, and then he said, 41. Again, softer, like a prayer, like a wound. But there was no time to grieve, because on the second day, Tomas moved early. Claire had known it was coming. Sophia said 3 days. But Sophia had also just learned that Claire knew everything, and a smart woman doesn't keep her old timeline once her secret's out. So when Frank's phone rang at 4 a.m. with word that Tomas had called an emergency gathering of the captains, Claire was already awake, already waiting for the ground to shift. He's making his move tonight, she told Vincent. Not in 3 days, tonight. Sophia lit the fuse early because she knows we're onto her. She's not waiting for her perfect plan anymore. She's just trying to make it end before we can stop it. Then it's already too late, Vincent said grimly. If Tomas has the captains, he has the army. When he moves, half my men move with him. No, Claire said. It's not too late, because Tomas doesn't know the one thing that changes everything. She looked at him. He doesn't know he's Sophia's puppet. He thinks he's the one taking your empire. He thinks tonight is his victory. Her eyes sharpened. So we don't fight Tomas, Vincent. We tell him the truth. We show him whose money built his army. We show him that the moment he kills you, Sophia hands his whole operation to the federal agents she's been feeding for 2 years, and Tomas takes the fall for all of it while she walks away clean. Claire stood. Tomas is cold and he's ambitious, but he's not stupid. And there is nothing a proud man hates more than learning he was somebody's tool. You want to turn Tomas, Vincent said slowly. The man who held a gun to your head. I want to hand him the truth and let him do the rest, Claire said. The same way I did with you. She paused. It won't make him good. It won't make him loyal. But a man who just learned he's been used doesn't finish the job he was used for. He turns on the hand that moved him. And the hand that moved him is the one person left in this whole war who actually needs to answer for it, Sophia. Vincent stared at her. And if he doesn't turn? If he just kills us both and takes his chances? Then we die having told the truth, Claire said, which is more than either of us would have managed a month ago. They found Tomas at the warehouse. The same warehouse. And this time Vincent walked in first, alone, unarmed, with Claire beside him, into a room full of captains and soldiers who went silent and deadly still the moment the man they'd come to depose walked through the door on his own 2 feet. Tomas rose slowly from the metal table. His hand went to his gun. "Vincent," he said, "you shouldn't have come." "I know everything, Tomas," Vincent said, and his voice was steady, and it filled the room. "The Shadow Army, the money, the poison at the dinner. I know all of it." He walked forward, past the reaching hands of soldiers who didn't know whether to grab him. "And I came here, alone, unarmed, into a room full of your men, to tell you the one thing you don't know, the one thing that matters more than any of it." Tomas's gun came up. "And what's that?" "You didn't build this," Vincent said. "Someone gave you the money to build it, 2 years ago, before you recruited a single man." He held Tomas's eyes. "You think this is your empire you're taking tonight. It isn't. You're taking it for someone else. And the moment you kill me, that someone hands every account, every name, every crime, all of it with your fingerprints on it, to federal agents in another state. You go to prison for the rest of your life, Tomas." And she walks into the sunset with everything. He paused. "Ask yourself, in 2 years of planning, did the money ever run out? Did you ever once wonder where it kept coming from? Did you ever really believe a head of security had the resources to fund an army for 2 years? Claire watched Tomas's face. She watched the professional in him, the survivor, do the same math she'd watched Vincent do, and Sophia do, and she watched the color drain out of his face as the pieces locked into place. "Sophia," Tomas said, barely a whisper. "Sophia," Vincent confirmed. "She built you, Tomas. She pointed you at me, and she's going to bury you the moment you pull that trigger." The room held its breath. And Thomas, the cold and patient man who'd waited 20 years, lowered his gun, and his face twisted into something that was almost grief, because there is no wound quite like the one a proud man feels when he learns he was never the player, only the piece. "Where is she?" Thomas said. But Sophia was already gone. She'd known. Of course she'd known. The moment Vincent walked into that warehouse alive and unarmed, Sophia understood her fire had gone out, and she did the thing she'd spent 2 years preparing to do. She ran. With the money, with the evidence, with everything. They found her at this private airfield, at the edge of the city, in the gray hour before dawn. One small plane waiting on the tarmac, and one small woman walking toward it with a single case in her hand that held enough to destroy 100 lives. Claire went alone. Vincent argued. Frank argued. But Claire understood something they didn't. Sophia wasn't going to be stopped by soldiers or guns. Sophia had planned for soldiers and guns. The only thing Sophia hadn't planned for, the only thing that had ruined her from the very beginning, was a person who wanted nothing. And that was Claire. "You came alone," Sophia said when Claire crossed the tarmac toward her. She didn't stop walking. "Of course you did. You're the only one who understands there's nothing here worth a gun." She reached the steps of the plane and turned. "It's over, Claire. I lost the empire, but I have the evidence, and I have the money, and I have a place where Vincent can't reach me. He'll spend the rest of his life dismantling what I built, looking over his shoulder, waiting for the day I decide to mail that hard drive after all." Her smile was thin and cold and utterly exhausted. "That's a kind of winning, the only kind I have left." "You don't have to win," Claire said quietly. "You could just stop." "Stop," Sophia laughed. "And do what?" "Give the evidence to the right people, not to burn a city down, to actually end it, cleanly." Claire took a step closer. "The girls are out, Sophia, all 41. We got them out yesterday, before Tomas moved, before your fire. They're safe, 2 states away, in a shelter you never touched." She watched Sophia's face. "You wanted to burn it all down so the monsters would stop. Well, the worst part is already stopped. The people you said you were doing this for, they're free, right now, this morning. It's done." Her voice softened. "You don't have to become the thing you hated to finish this. You already won the only part that ever mattered. The rest is just revenge. And revenge isn't going to give you back what Vincent took from you." Sophia stood very still on the steps of the plane, and for a long moment in the gray light, the cold accountant and the quiet waitress looked at each other across a distance that was only a few feet, and also the whole width of the choice Claire had made 4 years ago, and Sophia was making right now. "You got them out," Sophia said. Her voice cracked, just slightly for the first time. "All of them. All of them." "I didn't think anyone would," Sophia whispered. "I thought that's why it had to burn, because no one would ever just get them out." Something broke in her face, the ice cracking all the way through, and underneath it was the woman she'd been 8 years ago, before the monster's house had made her into a smaller monster to survive it. "I've wanted him dead so long," she said. "I forgot there was another way to stop wanting it." "There's always another way," Claire said. "It's just harder to see when you've stared at the fire too long." Sophia looked down at the case in her hand, and Claire watched a person stand at the exact edge she herself had once stood at, the same edge Vincent had stood at in his study, the edge where you choose between the worst thing you've become and the person you might still be. And she held her breath, because she'd learned by now that you cannot make the choice for anyone. You can only stand close enough that they don't feel alone when they make it. Sophia held out the case. "The right people," she said. "Not Vincent's people. Not to burn anyone, to end it, cleanly. Promise me." "I promise," Claire said, and this time she meant it, and Sophia could tell. Sophia handed her the case, and then the cold, brilliant, broken woman who had nearly outthought them all sat down on the steps of the plane that was going to carry her to freedom, and she put her face in her hands, and for the first time in 8 years, she cried like a person instead of planning like a weapon. "What happens to me now?" she said. "That's up to you," Claire said. "You can get on that plane. I won't stop you. Or you can help me make sure this ends the way you first meant it to, before revenge got into it. The organization comes down, the girls stay free, and the men who did this, all of them, including Vincent, answer for it in a courtroom instead of a war." She held out her hand. "I can't tell you which is right. I only know that running never once made me feel less like what I was. Not in 4 years, not for a single day." Sophia looked at the hand for a long time, and Claire never told anyone afterward which choice Sophia made. It was the one thing she kept, out of all of it. Some choices, she came to believe, belong only to the person who makes them. 3 months later, Claire Morgan returned to the Belmont house. She was still a waitress, still quiet, still moving through the room like a shadow with a tray, refilling water before anyone asked, remembering that the silver-haired gentleman at table 9 hated ice. Denise had taken her back without a single question, which was its own kind of grace. The city had changed while she was gone, though most people never knew it. An organization that had moved people in the dark for 30 years had come apart quietly in 100 sealed courtrooms and 1,000 pages of evidence that had arrived, clean and complete, in the hands of federal agents who could not be bought. Vincent Callahan's name had vanished from the magazine covers. It appeared now only in court records. He had not informed his way out. He had not traded 100 people to save himself. When it came time to answer, he had stood up in a courtroom and answered for all of it, in a way that stunned the prosecutors who'd spent their careers watching men like him wriggle free. He'd sent Claire one message before it all closed over him. Just one. 41, it said. "I count them every day. Thank you for teaching me how." She never wrote back, but she kept it. Tomas took his own deal, testified against the empire he'd tried to steal, and disappeared into the machinery of the law. The shadow army dissolved without a shot, because an army without money and without a cause is just a collection of frightened men looking for the exit. And the girls stayed free. All 41. That was the number Claire counted, on the hard nights, the way Vincent counted it on his. 41 people who had been waiting in the dark for someone to come. And someone had come because a waitress once decided she could not watch a man die when she had the power to stop it. And that one small decision had rolled outward through the world like a stone dropped in still water, touching lives she would never meet. She never got recognition. She never wanted it. There was no headline that said a quiet woman had brought down an empire by refusing to look away. There was only Claire, back at the Belmont house, pouring wine, disappearing into the wall, living the ordinary life she'd fought so hard to reclaim. But something had changed in her, and she felt it every day. She wasn't running anymore. For 4 years she'd hidden in that ordinary life like a fugitive, terrified that if anyone looked too closely, they'd see the person she used to be, the person who'd let innocents die for the right outcome. She'd chosen invisibility not out of peace, but out of fear. And somewhere in those 3 impossible days, the fear had finally burned away. She had stood in the fire she'd spent 4 years fleeing, and this time she had not made the choice that haunted her. This time she had gotten the innocent out first. This time she had not paid for the right outcome in other people's blood. She could not go back and save the people she'd lost in her old life. That wound would never fully close, and she'd stopped pretending it would. But she had learned the thing she'd needed to learn, the thing she'd walked back into hell to find out. That a person who had been the villain could still choose, at the very end, to do one right thing when everything said don't. That it was possible. She'd watched Vincent do it. She'd watched Sophia stand at the edge of it, and she'd finally, after 4 years, done it herself. One evening near closing, a young busboy named Marcus lingered by her station as she polished glasses. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You've been here years, and I still don't know anything about you. Where you're from, what you did before, anything." He shrugged, a little embarrassed. "You just seem like someone who's seen a lot, more than a restaurant." Claire looked at him, this kid who reminded her, a little, of who she might have been before the world got its hands on her. "I saw enough," she said, "to learn one thing worth passing on." "What's that?" She held a wineglass up to the light, checking it, turning it slowly, the way she'd once turned another glass in another life, on the night that had changed everything. "The person everyone ignores," Claire said, "is usually the one who sees the whole room, and the quietest person at the table is usually the one who can change the entire game." She set the glass down, squared and straight, exactly where it belonged. "So be kind to the quiet ones, Marcus. You never know which of them is holding the whole thing together while nobody's watching." Marcus laughed, not quite understanding, and went back to his work. And Claire Morgan finished polishing the glasses one by one in the warm and ordinary light of a restaurant on a quiet Chicago night, a woman nobody noticed, carrying a piece she had finally earned. She had wanted to prevent one unnecessary death. She had ended up changing the fate of everyone around her. And she had learned, once and for all, that the smallest choice made in silence by the person no one is watching can be the very thing that changes the entire world. 1 year after the Empire fell, on an ordinary Tuesday, a letter arrived at the Belmont house with no return address. Claire almost didn't open it. She'd learned to be careful with mail that came without a name, and for a long moment she stood by the coat rack in the back hallway, turning the plain envelope over in her hands, listening to the old instinct that had kept her alive through 2 lives. But the handwriting on the front was neat and small and precise, the handwriting of a person who had once spent her days keeping ledgers, and Claire knew who it was before she opened it. Sophia. The letter was short. It didn't say where she was. It didn't ask for anything. It said only that she was alive, that she was somewhere warm and quiet where no one knew her name, and that she had done the thing Claire asked. She had helped it end cleanly. She had made sure the evidence reached the right hands, all of it. And then she had walked away from the wreckage of her own revenge and started, at 44 years old, the long work of becoming a person again instead of a weapon. There was one line at the bottom that Claire read 3 times. "You told me there was always another way," it said. "I didn't believe you. I do now. I count them too, Claire. All 41. Some nights they're the only thing that lets me sleep. Thank you for not letting me become the thing I was trying to destroy." Claire folded the letter and put it in her pocket, and she carried it for the rest of her shift, and something in her chest that had been clenched tight for a very long time loosened just a little, because that was the thing about what they'd done, the thing no headline would ever capture. It hadn't just saved 41 people from the dark, it had saved the 3 people standing at the edge of the fire, too. Vincent, who'd chosen to answer for his life instead of trading 100 souls to escape it. Sophia, who'd chosen to end the monster's house without becoming a monster to do it. And Claire herself, who'd finally stopped running from the person she'd been and learned instead to become the person she'd wanted to be all along. 3 people who had all been standing on the same terrible edge. 3 people who had all, in the end, stepped back from it. And the thing that had pulled them back every time was not force, and not fear, and not clever strategy. It was a quiet woman who wanted nothing, standing close enough that none of them had to make the choice alone. The letter from Sophia stirred something in Claire that she'd kept buried for a year, and that night, for the first time since it all ended, she let herself think about Vincent. He was in prison now, in a facility upstate. serving a sentence that would keep him there for the rest of his natural life. He had not fought it. When the trials came, his own lawyers had begged him to inform, to trade, to give the prosecutors bigger names in exchange for a lighter sentence. It was what men like Vincent always did. It was the whole reason Sophia had wanted him dead instead of arrested, because she'd been so certain he'd wriggle free. He hadn't. He'd stood up in that courtroom, and when the prosecutor asked him whether he wished to cooperate in exchange for leniency, Vincent Callahan had said no. He had said he would answer for what he had done, all of it, and he would not buy a single day of his freedom with anyone else's suffering. Not anymore. Not ever again. The prosecutors had not known what to do with him. In 30 years of putting men like Vincent away, they'd never once seen one refuse the deal. The newspapers, on the rare occasion they covered it, called him a broken man, a fallen king who'd lost his nerve. They didn't understand. They looked at a man who wouldn't save himself and saw weakness. Claire looked at the same man and saw the only strong thing he'd ever done. She'd never visited him. In a year, she'd never gone. She told herself it was because visitors were logged, because her name near his would undo the careful anonymity she'd rebuilt, because there was nothing left to say. All of those things were true. But underneath them was another truth, one she'd only recently let herself see. She hadn't gone because a part of her was afraid of what it would mean. Afraid that if she sat across from him, she'd have to admit that somewhere in those 3 impossible days, this dangerous, terrible, transformed man had become something to her that she didn't have a word for. Not friend, not quite. Something rarer. A person who had watched her at her most true, who had known exactly what she was and exactly what she'd done in her old life, and had never once looked at her with anything but respect. She'd spent her whole life being invisible. Vincent Callahan was the one person who had truly seen her and lived. So a week after Sophia's letter came, Claire did the thing she'd been afraid to do for a year. She put on her coat and she took a bus, and then another, and then a third, out of the city and north through the winter countryside to a place she'd sworn she'd never go. She signed the visitor log with a name that wasn't hers, and she sat at a scarred metal table in a cold room. And she waited. When they brought Vincent in, she almost didn't recognize him. The suit was gone, of course. The armor. The silver-templed magazine cover was gone, too. He was thinner, older, and his hands, when he set them on the table, were the hands of a man who'd learned to sit still for long stretches of time. But his eyes, when they found her face, were exactly the same. Sharp. Present. Amused. Even here. Even now. "Miss Morgan," he said, and something eased in his voice, something Claire realized had been braced for a year. "I'd given up on you." "I gave up on me too," Claire said, "a few times." He almost smiled. "You look well. You look like a person who's stopped running." "I have." "Good." He said it with such simple, complete sincerity that Claire had to look down at the table. "That's good, Claire. That was the only thing I ever wanted for you, the one thing I could never buy for anyone and couldn't give you either. I'm glad you found it yourself." He folded his hands. "You didn't have to come. I know what it costs you. Your name near mine. You spent 4 years being no one, and I'm the last person on earth who should pull you back into the light." "Sophia wrote to me," Claire said. Vincent went very still. "She's alive." "She's alive. Somewhere warm," she said. "She's counting them too, Vincent. All 41. She helped end it clean, the way she first meant to, before the revenge got in." Claire looked up. "She became a person again." That's what she said. At 44 years old, she started over as a person instead of a weapon. For a long moment, Vincent said nothing. And then, to Claire's astonishment, his eyes filled, and he had to look away toward the barred window, and when he spoke, his voice was rough. "I did that to her," he said. "The woman she became, the weapon, the years she lost. I did that. My house made her into that. She spent 2 years trying to burn me alive, and every bit of it was earned." He wiped his face with the back of his hand. "And she got to become a person again. She got out. That's more mercy than I deserve to feel glad about, but I'm glad. God help me, I'm glad." "You gave her that too," Claire said quietly. "When you refused the deal, when you stood up in that courtroom and answered instead of trading, you took the fall you actually earned instead of pushing it onto someone else. That's why it ended clean. That's why she got to walk away instead of spending her life waiting for you to come after her." Claire held his eyes. "You think you don't deserve to feel glad. But you're the reason it ended the right way, Vincent. You and her both. Two people who spent their whole lives doing the wrong thing and chose, at the very end when it cost you everything, to do one right thing. I told you it was possible. You proved it." Vincent looked at her for a long time. "You keep saying that," he said. "That one right thing, like it balances anything. It doesn't, Claire. 41 people got out, but there were others, before them, over 30 years, who didn't. I can't count those. I've tried. The number's too big and the record's too old, and most of them I never even knew existed." His voice was steady, but the pain in it was total. "So don't tell me one right thing balances the scale. It doesn't. Nothing will. I'll die in here still owing a debt I can never pay." "I know," Claire said. "Then why?" Vincent said. "Do you keep coming back to it? Why does it matter so much to you that a man like me did one decent thing at the end of a rotten life?" And Claire, who had told him the deepest truth of her old life in his study a year ago, told him the last piece now. The piece she'd never spoken to anyone, not even herself, not all the way. "Because I need to believe it for me," she said. "Not for you. For me." She wrapped her hands around each other on the cold table. "You know what I did in my old life? I told you. I was the one with the power, and I ran the numbers, and I decided some innocent lives were an acceptable price for the right outcome, and people died because of it. People who trusted me, people who had no idea their lives were being weighed on a scale by a stranger." Her voice caught. "I've spent every day since then wondering if a person who does that is just broken, ruined, past saving. Whether the thing I did put me in a category of person who doesn't get to become good, no matter how hard they try. Whether all my quiet years and my good deeds were just a broken person pretending." She looked up at him, and her eyes were wet, and she didn't hide it. "And then I met you," she said, "and I met Sophia. Two people who'd done far worse than I ever did, for far longer. And I watched both of you stand at the edge of the worst thing you'd ever become, and step back. And choose to be better. Not perfect. Not balanced. Not forgiven. Just better. In one moment when it mattered." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "And if you two could do that, after everything, then maybe I can too. Maybe I'm not in a category past saving. Maybe nobody is. Maybe the whole idea that some people are just ruined is the same lie you told yourself for 30 years so you could keep doing the wrong thing. Some deaths are acceptable. Some people are past saving. It's the same lie, Vincent. And watching you break it broke it for me too." The cold room was silent, and Vincent Callahan, who had commanded armies and terrified cities and stood unflinching before federal prosecutors, looked at the quiet waitress across the scarred metal table and understood, at last and completely, the thing he'd only glimpsed a year ago in his study. She hadn't saved him because she cared about him. Not at first. She hadn't walked back into that dangerous world for his sake, or Sophia's, or even the 41. She'd done it because she was drowning, and the only way she knew how to save herself was to make absolutely sure that other people, standing where she'd once stood, could still be pulled back to shore. Every person she pulled back was proof that she could be pulled back too. Every villain who chose to be better was evidence, entered into the record of her own aching heart, that she was not past saving either. "Claire," Vincent said gently, "look at me." She looked at him. "You want to know if a person who does a terrible thing can still become good," he said. "You've been asking that question for 4 years, and you've been looking for the answer in me and in Sophia and in every soul you could pull back from the edge." He leaned forward as far as the table would let him. "But you've been looking in the wrong place the whole time. You don't need me for the answer. You've been the answer all along." Claire's breath caught. "You did a terrible thing in your old life," Vincent said. "You've never once denied it, never once tried to soften it, never once asked anyone to tell you it was okay. You just carried it, and you changed, and you spent everything you had left saving people who could never repay you and never even knew your name. 41 people are free because a broken woman refused to believe her own brokenness was the end of the story." His voice was fierce now, and certain. You are not evidence-gathering, Claire. You are the evidence. You are the living proof of the exact thing you've been so afraid to believe. A person who did the unforgivable can still spend the rest of their life doing good. You're not looking for that person. You are that person. You have been the whole time. Claire Morgan, who had not cried in front of another human being in more years than she could count, put her face in her hands and wept. And Vincent Callahan, who could not reach across the table, who was not allowed to touch her, sat with her while she did it. And that was its own kind of grace. The feared king sitting quiet and helpless while the woman who'd saved him from himself finally let herself be saved a little too. When it was over, when the guard signaled that time was almost up, Claire wiped her face and stood. "I'm not going to come back," she said. "You understand. My name near yours. The life I've built." "I know," Vincent said. "I never expected you once. You gave me more than I earned just by walking in." He looked up at her. "Live the quiet life, Claire. The one you fought so hard for. Pour the wine. Disappear into the wall. And know that somewhere upstate, an old man is counting to 41 every day and thinking that the best thing he ever did with all his power was to finally give it up when a waitress showed him how." He smiled, and for once there was nothing dangerous in it at all, only warmth. "You were the quietest person in every room, and you changed the entire game, every one of us. Don't you ever forget that." "I won't," Claire said, and she didn't. She went back to the city, and back to the Belmont house, and back to the ordinary life she'd chosen and fought for, and finally, fully, come to inhabit without fear. She poured wine. She remembered that the silver-haired gentleman at table 9 hated ice. She trained the new servers, and she was kind to the quiet ones, and once in a great while, when the light caught a wine glass a certain way, she thought about the night that had changed everything, and she smiled to herself, and she moved on. She never told anyone what she'd done. There was no monument to a woman who brought down an empire by refusing to look away. There was no headline, no medal, no recognition of any kind, and she wanted none of it. The 41 people she'd freed would live out their lives never knowing her name. And that was exactly as it should be, because Claire had learned the deepest secret of a life well lived, which is that the truest good is the kind that asks for nothing back, the kind done in silence by a person no one is watching. Sophia wrote to her twice a year, always from somewhere new, always without a return address, always counting to 41. Vincent's messages stopped after a while, and Claire understood and did not grieve, because some debts get carried alone, and some men prefer to carry them in silence. And Claire Morgan grew old in that quiet life, a woman nobody noticed, carrying a peace she had finally, fully earned. She had wanted only to prevent one unnecessary death. She had ended up freeing 41 souls, redeeming 2 of the most dangerous people in a dangerous city, and saving, last of all and most quietly of all, herself. Because in the end, she had learned the one thing worth learning, the thing she had walked back into hell to discover and had spent the rest of her life proving true. No one is past saving, not the Mafia boss who gave up his empire to answer for his sins, not the accountant who chose to become a person instead of a weapon, and not the quiet waitress who once believed her own brokenness was the end of her story, and discovered, in the saving of others, that she had been worth saving all along. The smallest choice, made in silence by the person no one is watching, can change the entire world. Claire Morgan had made that choice, and the world had never been the same.